One of my favorite parts of Fallout 3 was exploring the long, dark, and impossibly confusing metro tunnels of the Capital Wastes. It made the world feel big, the city feel real. Sadly, we do not find a sprawling underground labyrinth, but instead, Bethesda gave us an urban jungle to explore in downtown Boston. Some of the most interesting places to explore downtown are unmarked locations. Others aren't even associated with quests, and we would never find them unless we stumbled upon them through exploration. Bethesda did a great job of connecting many of these places together, giving us open dungeons to explore. Today we'll go through one of these open dungeons comprised of 4 different locations. We'll start at Faneuil Hall in the heart of downtown. I covered Faneuil Hall in a dedicated video, which if interested you can watch here. But if from the hall we walk south, we eventually come to a pre-war bank, now in complete ruin and guarded by raiders.
Here come the fireworks!
Shouldn't take long. Don't forget to check your ammo.
There are 2 entrances into the bank. One is a big blue metal exterior door on the eastern side of the building. The other is an elevator inside the lobby. After looting quite a stash of Nuka-Cola from the half-buried Nuka-Cola machine, we can take the only functional elevator up into the ruins of the skyscraper. This, incidentally, is one of the few elevators that still has functioning elevator music. The elevator opens up to a big ruined hallway. We can go right through some big double doors, or we can turn left past another elevator and down a hallway that rounds a corner. Going all the way to the end leads us to an advanced locked door. This was a tiny bathroom next to some fountains. Inside we just find a first aid kit. Many of the other doors here are blocked up, but we do find a staircase to the east. If we follow this all the way to the ground floor, we find a mailbox and an exit. This brings us out that big blue metal exterior door that we saw upon arrival. Heading back inside, we can retrace our steps back up the staircase, and I am curious about this other elevator, but before we explore it, let's continue forward through the big double doors. Here we find a Protectron charging in its charging dock. We can release it using the terminal on the wall, and then hack it to turn it into a temporary companion. There's a small office directly west of the Protectron. Inside we find a couple of containers and 1 novice-locked floor safe. We find a blue wooden door to the west, but before we see what's outside, we'll go behind the counter and through the doorway to find a vault. The vault security door can't be picked. It requires a terminal to access, and the terminal requires an expert level in hacking. But if we hack the terminal, we have the option to open the security door. After an elaborate opening sequence, we find the contents of this bank that has not been seen by human eyes in over 200 years. Much of what we find here is pre-war money. There are 2 floor safes on the ground to the southwest. Inside each we find a little bit of ammunition, but more than anything pre-war money. And really that's about it. There's 1 more safe to the northeast. It's already opened, and inside we find more pre-war money, which I suppose makes sense. It wouldn't be very realistic if we open this vault after 200 years and find a big store of bottle caps. Now that we've opened the vault, let's go see what's at the top of that other elevator. After punching the button, we can open the hatch to see that we're going up. The door opens on the other side, and we find a small staircase leading up to a door to the financial district. This brings us to the rooftop of the bank. We see a big board supported by cinder blocks, at the base of which is an ammo container. This is one of the many perches where we can place one of Tinker Tom's Mila devices while performing his Radiant quests for the railroad. Tinker Tom's Mila Radiant quests are the only ones that bring us to this bank, so it's quite possible that if we didn't side with the railroad, we may never have even gone here. If we have a jetpack on our power armor, we can hop on up to explore the ruins on the very top, but there's really nothing here. From here, of course, we could use our jetpack to sail over to the rooftop of another building, but instead, let's see what other place we can connect to from this building by foot. Heading back through the door and taking the elevator back down to the vault level, we can walk west and go out the big blue wooden door to the financial district. This leads us to a sky bridge overlooking the ruins of the financial district. We see an elevator on the platform on the other side of the sky bridge and also a stairway going up. If we scale the stairs, we arrive on a level that's mostly destroyed, but we do see a bit of a rubble ramp made from metal flooring and even a ruined car that leads to the overpass that goes through downtown Boston. Now from here, we can access many different ruins as the overpass touches half a dozen of them. But instead, I'll show you how we can circle back to this point by taking another path. So instead of going across, let's jump on down and go through that elevator that we passed earlier. Stepping inside and punching the button, the elevator moves and we see a hatch at the top, but unlike many of the other hatches, this one is inaccessible. We can't open it. This brings us to the bottom floor of an underground parking garage. Here we find the corpses of many already dead ghouls, but no explanation as to how they died. In the northeastern corner, under one of the ramps next to a ruined car and a bunch of barrels surrounded by flammable oil, we find an advanced locked safe. Inside, we find a tidy stash of explosives and some other goodies. Climbing up the ramp to the next level, we see that the parking garage brings us right back out to where we started. Here we are, right outside Faneuil Hall. But let's head back into the garage to see where else it might lead us. We find two more Protectron charging docks with a connected terminal, and then taking the staircase west from these, we can round a corner to find a big blue metal door to Haymarket Mall. On the other side, we hear a fight going on between Protectrons and presumably raiders. We see a door to the left that leads to another staircase. We'll come back to explore this in a moment. And then a door to the northeast that leads us to a storage room. Continuing along, we can open a door to the north, which brings us to a security office with two more security robots. And continuing through this room and down a hallway, we enter the main lobby to Haymarket Mall. We can take the stairs on up to this upper portion of the mall until at last the raiders come back and attack us.
You're already dead. I think we're being shot. Right here. Right here.
Haymarket Mall is made up of many pre-war shops that at one time must have sold wonderful luxury goods. But today, over 200 years later, we find little evidence of the luxury that was once here. Instead, each of these rooms has been taken over and repurposed by the raiders. In one, we find a bunch of ruined display cases that have long since been pilfered of their goods. But we do find an armor and weapon workbench in here. Heading out, we can explore the room to the northeast. This must have been where some of the raiders slept. We find a mattress on the ground. There are 3 containers here, a suitcase, a cash register with some ammunition and pre-war money, and then an expert-locked floor safe beneath the desk with more randomized loot. Now, before we go and explore the rest of the old shops here on the shopping level, I keep hearing this robot shouting warnings at me. I wanted to see if I could find him, so heading back down and turning into the door from which we entered, we can retrace our steps through the workshop, do a bit of looting that we failed to do earlier, and then head into that door with the stairway that we passed upon entry. Heading up the stairs on the second floor, we find a door, but let's continue up. At the very top of the stairs, we find a duffel bag filled with pre-war money, ammunition, and other goods, lying next to the skeleton of a woman. Perhaps this was her survival bag. She packed it just after the bombs dropped, and she tried to make a run for it, only to succumb to radiation poisoning in the stairwell. The doorway to the top floor here has been boarded up, so our only way forward is to go down the stairs and through the door to the second level of Haymarket Mall. We find ourselves by an elevator next to the raiders that we killed previously. After looting their corpses, we can explore this final shop on the second floor of Haymarket Mall. This one must have been a bookshop, I'm guessing, due to all of the bookshelves, but we don't find a lot of books. We find a lot of beer bottles, but I think these might have been left by the raiders. The 2 mannequins may mean that this was a clothing shop, but otherwise we don't really find any evidence as to what it was. Heading back down to the lobby level, we see a double door to the northwest. This is the main door to Haymarket Mall.
Are you fucking kidding me?
to work. Engage the target.
And of course it was heavily guarded. That probably wasn't the wisest move on my part, but at least they're all dead. We see that the raiders have really fortified the exterior to Haymarket Mall. Sandbag barricades, scrap walls, barbed wire, but we still see the big pre-war sign, Haymarket Mall. We find a few ammo boxes and small containers lying on the gantries that they've erected, and once done, we can go back through the main doors to Haymarket Mall. One final thing to explore here in this lobby is a room to the south. This was another bedroom for the raiders, sleeping bags and mattresses all over the place. We find a few containers to loot, including a duffel bag with missiles and more ammunition inside and a stash of caps. This leaves one more avenue to explore. Heading back to the second floor, we can take the elevator. After punching the button, we can open the hatch on top. I tried using my jetpack to see if any of these doors in the elevator shaft were functional, but after exploring each one, I discovered that they weren't. But while I was busying myself with this, X6 got himself into trouble.
Scanning for hostile.
Well, looks like he can handle himself. Dropping back down, we see that the elevator lets us out into a ruined hallway. We find two doors. Opening the northern one first, we see that X6 had been fighting some ceiling-mounted turrets. Looks like he got injured.
The pain was starting to get to me, but only starting.
Continuing north down the hallway, we can round a corner into the next room to find...
Hostile target identified.
Pre-war Protectron security and wall-mounted turrets. It looks like above Haymarket Mall were a bunch of offices, either the office spaces of the people who were running the mall, or perhaps they were office spaces for let that were leased to other businesses. Here we find an open office seating plan with a bunch of desks and terminals laid out. Heading through the eastern door leads us to maybe an executive's room? We find two desks back to back, and then an expert-locked floor safe. Inside, we find explosives, chems, and even an overdue book. Heading out and going through the broken door to the south, we find some raiders that the pre-war security must have killed, and an office terminal. But sadly, this terminal doesn't give us any lore, it just controls the Protectrons and the turrets. After looting the filing cabinets and other containers in this office, we find a novice-locked door to the west. Unlocking it leads us back to the hallway with the elevator. So this was the second door that we found, which means that the only way forward is to go back east and head up that rubble ramp to the floor above. This brings us to a blue door to the north labeled Haymarket Mall Roof. We find ourselves in a collapsed room with a big hole in the northern wall. Walking through the hole leads us to the rooftop. But interestingly, we see trees here. Going down a staircase, we arrive at a garden terrace. Sadly, it was raining, so we can't take in the beauty of this place, but we can tell that before the war, it must have been really nice. There's a fountain in the middle and a lot of lovely shrubs and plants, which were probably blooming before the war. Looking south, we see an overturned car. From here, if we have a jetpack, we can launch ourselves across the way to land on the overpass. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier in this video. On the other end, we find that bridge made from the ruined car leading back to the bank. So that completes a big loop. Heading back to the garden terrace, we see that the pre-war railing is mostly intact except for one big gap to the east. Heading over to peer over the gap... Oh god, a deathclaw! What was a deathclaw doing on the roof of a skyscraper in downtown Boston? For the deathclaw to have attacked from there, she must have been clinging to the wall of the skyscraper. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. On the northeastern corner of this roof, we see what looks like a ruined monorail and some scaffolding leading down the side of the skyscraper. That's one way we can crawl down if we don't have power armor, but let's see what else we can find. To the east, we find a small room with more ruined display cases. Here we find an end-of-dungeon steamer trunk, but in mine I only found a compensated powerful pipe pistol. A little bit disappointing. We see that this floor is crumbling down into the rooms below, but instead of dropping down, let's try taking this elevator. Punching the button, we notice that the door to the elevator is missing. This allows us to see each of the rooms that we pass as we head down to the bottom. At the bottom level, we see that the monorail has completely crashed through this room. There's really no way out, no doors, no windows, but we do find an advanced locked floor safe with quite an assortment of goodies inside. Now, I wanted to see if I could explore some of the other rooms. Punching the button to the elevator as it goes up, we can quickly walk across to room number 2. Here we find a skeleton on the ground and a stealth boy on a counter. The skeleton may have been the pre-war resident of this apartment, or possibly one of the monorail travelers. Maybe he got knocked out of the monorail as it crashed into the skyscraper. To do this trick again with the next floor, we have to hop down, call the elevator, wait for it to arrive, get inside, punch the button, then wait for it to pass the second floor, and then as it passes the third floor, run on through. But sadly here we don't find anything. We get a better view of the ruined monorail and we see a bunch of skeletons inside, but we can't climb out this way. There is one more ruined door, but we can't open it, and we're kind of stuck. So, jumping down to the bottom again, calling the elevator, waiting for it to arrive, going inside and punching the button, we can take it back up to the top. Now that we're back at the garden terrace, we can head out the room and go down the scaffolding. One level down, we find a platform with some sandbag barricades and a toolbox. The next level down, we pass a skeleton, possibly a skyscraper worker, which would explain the scaffolding, and a bridge made from the boards of the scaffolding to the nearby wrecked monorail. We can go down towards the head of the monorail by facing south. Here we see the remains of many of the travelers who died that fateful day, and these bones are haunted. Not really, it's just a quirk of the physics Bethesda uses in their creation engine, but it can lead to rather creepy glitches. There's a big pile of bodies at this end of the monorail. I believe that's because this is the lowest point. Many of the other bodies could have fallen down here, and as the monorail crashed into the building, the abrupt halt likely threw the passengers all the way to the front of the monorail. At the very end, we find a bunch of suitcases that have also fallen down here, and we find the engineer. At least in his last moments, he had a wonderful view of Faneuil Hall. Turning around, we can explore the rest of this train. We pass by even more corpses, and then halfway through we meet a Protectron Guardian.
Didn't take long. That was good.
He was likely pre-war tram security. Maybe he even collected monorail tickets. I'm impressed that this guy has lasted all these years and that he survived the wreckage of the monorail. Sad that we have to be the ones to end up destroying him. Through one of the open doors to the monorail, we find another board weighted down with a cinder block. This is another platform from which we can attach one of Tinker Tom's Milas in his weather vane quests. This is an exceptional perch for the device. It commands an amazing view of downtown. At the very end of the monorail, we find a big red end-of-dungeon steamer trunk. And thankfully this one had some decent loot inside. And with that, we finish exploring this open dungeon. From here we can take the scaffolding from the garden terrace all the way down to the ground, or use a jetpack to sail on over to the overpass, which allows us to explore a bunch of other mini-dungeons, or we can sail on off into the city to see what adventure we can find. Bethesda was unable to give us big urban exploration experiences like this in Fallout 3 due to game engine limitations of the day. The same is true of Fallout New Vegas. The reason the Strip, for example, is split into a bunch of different zones separated by walls was due to hardware restraints of the day. They initially imagined the Strip as being one big open zone. But if you read The Art of Fallout 4, we learn that with Fallout 4, the developers felt strongly that Boston needed to be one big open explorable city. In order to do this, they had to do a lot of engine improvements and come up with new innovations to make Boston the explorable ruin we find in the game. Despite the lag and the FPS issues most of us have while exploring Boston, I still think it's quite a technical achievement and it's one of my favorite features of Fallout 4. What are your thoughts on the bank, the garage, Haymarket Mall, and the garden terrace? In past playthroughs, the deathclaw attacked me as soon as I stepped foot in the garden. I'm not sure why this time she waited to attack until I looked over the edge. Were you surprised by the deathclaw in your game? And how do you explain how the deathclaw got there to begin with? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I publish a new Fallout video 6 days a week on a wide range of topics spanning all of the games. If you want to make sure that you don't miss my next video, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter if you want to keep up to date with all Oxhorn news. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.